kick off in a moment. I think the live stream is just beginning. So welcome to this panel today, where we are talking about how local should global go. My name is Blathnaid Healy. I'm the Director of Europe, Mid East and Africa at CNN International, the digital side. And I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by a really terrific panel who are going to introduce themselves. So starting with Polly Curtis to my left.
Hello, my name is Polly Curtis. I'm Editor-in-Chief of HuffPost UK, which is one of the 17 HuffPost editions. I've been there for about 7 months. Most of my career was at The Guardian, where I was most recently digital editor. It's lovely to be here.
Do I need to press anything? Yes. Green button.
So, hello, I'm Alison Gow. I'm the Editor-in-Chief for Digital with Trinity Mirror in the UK. So Trinity Mirror is the largest, I think, legacy sort of publisher in terms of newspapers and websites in the UK. We are national and regional and local, and I work across the regional and local publications primarily.
Hi all, my name is Dmitry Shishkin. I'm Digital Development Editor for BBC World Service. We're running the team of 40 different language websites around the world, from really big messy ones to really small ones, and my job is to kind of oversee the digital growth of all of them at the same time, looking at the way they do digital, the way they develop, the way they share content, and ultimately serve the audience around the world better.
So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what I'm hoping we're going to do in this panel discussion today, and then we'll have a good conversation up here, and then I want you to think about some questions that you might want to ask when we open it up for a wider discussion. So the concept really behind this panel was to have a think about how global media organizations are really outwardly pushing into new places maybe that they haven't previously. The world is definitely changing, and population is shifting. We're seeing growth rates in countries far outpace others, for example, and I think that that's a motivation, shall we say, certainly for media organizations to really start thinking about engaging in locations that maybe they haven't been as active in previously. Growing audiences is definitely, and new audiences is incredibly hard, and doing that in a way when you have to think about different locations and localities and different people and the types of stories that work in different countries across the world is certainly not easy. And then we have the added challenge that, with platform changes of late, that it is, they're kind of a new set of challenges, especially in markets where, for example, Facebook might be the internet, and slightly different relationship to possibly the role that they play in more in Western countries in the US. But there's huge rewards, if you are successful diversifying the audience that you're reaching, and then it helps to reshape the general broader coverage that you're offering as an organization to other parts of the world. But part of this, and hopefully one of the topics that we're going to get to today, is if you're successful in these endeavors as a global organization, what responsibilities then do you have to those audiences? And we're very fortunate that the panel makeup today reflects a lot of different approaches to working within local markets. And by local, I guess I should say up front, it can be local as in sort of extending and working in countries that previously your organization hasn't had as much of a presence in, but then also hyperlocal and becoming more regional and more local in your coverage. So I wanted to start off a little bit with that and ask everybody on the panel what local means for their companies, because it is a little bit different from the Huffington Post to Trinity Mirror to the BBC. So Polly, do you want to open us up?
So I think HuffPost is working on lots of different levels. The 17 editions are kind of bound together by common themes and a common editorial approach. But we're very much mandated as individual editions to develop a very strong relationship with our own audiences, which means speaking their language, using the local kind of words and jokes that make sense in that context. So we're not trying to homogenise one HuffPost across the world that would work wherever you're. We're trying to be true to those markets we're in. So we're in 17 countries and we have 17 domestic audiences. The second level to that, and the thing that's been really interesting since Lydia Polgreen took over HuffPost US, and something I've really taken up in the UK as well, is trying to get more local within our countries. So this is thinking a lot about the idea that the media in some places lost touch a bit with their audiences, lost touch with the themes that were going on. And I think kind of the big totemic moment for HuffPost was very much around the Trump election. And there was this thing where HuffPost US refused to take Trump off the entertainment section and run him in the politics section. And it was like a statement about it. And it was a really big misjudgment. And when Lydia came in, she felt that that was a moment to seize and say, right, we need to get out of the New York kind of East Coast bubble and reconnect with the country we're in, because we are missing audience because we are not talking about the things they understand. So she's done that by sending reporters out, getting them out. For a site that was based initially on aggregation, reporters were very office-based. So she sent reporters out all over the country and did this big activation where she basically put the newsroom on a bus and toured around Trump's America. And I think it was a very kind of, like it opened up the newsroom to the experience that America was having. And now we're really taking up that mantle in the UK in a much more less kind of bus way, and investing in reporters around the country. And the point of having reporters outside London for HuffPost UK is not to replicate what Alison's teams do so amazingly, not to do local journalism, but to make us a truly national outfit, to really connect with all parts of the country and get out of that London bubble. Mm-hmm. So I think that's kind of the story of HuffPost.
Alison, in some ways, that's what journalism is to your company and what you do. Can you expand on what local means to Trinity Mirror?
Yeah, of course. So I'll leave aside the national portfolio. I'll just talk about regional, local and hyperlocal, and that might be print or website. But essentially, we're a digital-first set of publications, and we don't tend to talk in platforms. We talk in terms of audiences. So for us, what is local? Local would be potentially the street that you live in, the town that you live in, the city region or the country region that you live in, and that's how we approach things. People will want basically the information from our publications that will help them live their lives. That's what we try and provide. So that might be an information service, it might be an entertainment service, and the way that we build that is around a kind of tell me, help me, entertain me pillars that just ensure that we are thinking about the local audience. We have like a global audience on our local brands. If you're a Liverpool Football Club fan, you go to the Liverpool Echo website, and that's an authoritative voice, and you want to read those stories. But we never lose sight of the fact that actually we're local brands, and that's what makes us special and gives us a life. People have known the name of some of our brands for like over 150 years. Just because we're on a different platform, it doesn't mean that we don't need to respect those names and respect the expectations that they have of us as well, which is that we won't talk down where they live. We will be on their side and highlight the issues that they face. We'll be in the communities as much as we can with them. They won't just see us when there's a murder on the street. They'll see us for general community events and happenings. Where that's a challenge these days is, of course, nobody's newsroom is as big as it was 10 years ago. And so being that kind of public face and being on the streets and being part of a community, it's even more important now. There are reporters kind of live and breathe and are part of the area that they cover. So all our reporters live in those areas. Their kids go to those schools. They'll, you know, some of them are counsellors. It is part of so local. Yeah, it's part of basically living and understanding the story and the narrative and the dance of the area that you cover.
And I mean, Dmitry, it can be probably defined in a couple of ways, right, at the BBC, because you've got the large kind of regional operation, but then you're pushing into more countries in a local way.
So I think putting things into perspective here. So we are a absolute typical legacy organization. We have been doing international foreign language broadcasting for many decades, and the thing that my team and the sister teams do at the BBC is to help not only launch new teams, because we have just finished this massive expansion into other foreign markets, and we have launched 12 new languages on digital and social media in the last 9 months. So it has been like the best year of my career, frankly, in terms of what you got out of it. But we, as your journalists, we pride ourselves on having all our journalists living in those localities, and they know that area very well. And another thing is that I remember the time where we used to consider other foreign international broadcasters our competitors. Voice of America, Radio Liberty, RFI, all of this, because of radio mainly in the past. But on digital, I vividly remember the time when I was still a producer with the Russian service many years ago, when we stopped considering all of these Russian outlets our competitors, because we specifically decided editorially to compete against local competitors in those markets individually. And this is helped by the fact that we have teams on the ground everywhere. And in some markets we go because we want to expand reach, like in India. In some markets we go because we are the sole provider of independent and trusted news, like Horn of Africa, for example, you know, where the access to news is just not there at all. We're blocked in many countries, like Iran, for example, as well. So we are finding different ways of reaching audiences there. But the most important thing is that we and this is probably a controversial thing to say, but I will say it nevertheless, I think that we are the best integrated multilingual news organization in the world in terms of how our vernacular language journalism is contributing to the overall strength of BBC journalism as a whole. And this is a prerequisite in terms of how we contribute. We contribute two ways. We cover the country the best we can, but equally we also then contribute the best out of that country coverage back to the BBC as a whole for the value of the license fee payer. So this is a really important thing for us. And I guess when you talk about competitors, and you know, for me it's always very important to, as soon as local competition or local players start considering us their competitors, then we have arrived in terms of, for example, how if we are in the top 5 most quoted news organization in that particular market, then we are already part of the fabric of that country. And that was never the case before. So for us, we broadly kind of look at what the BBC can do, and we try to kind of describe it it wasn't written anywhere about this, but we just generally describe it by 2 words: explain and connect. We are probably best placed to explain things to people, because you know they will be updated about what's happening by others. But we, with the BBC strength of journalism, we can connect people around the world, because we are actually investing a lot of time and money to recirculate our journalism across 40 teams the best we can, and we have never done that before. And we also, instead of just only telling people what is happening, we always try to prioritize why the things are happening and what it will mean to me personally.
To pick up on something you said there about success in some ways is if these local outlets start to consider you competition.
Yeah.
There's a double-edged sword there, right? Because, you know, and probably maybe this is something I'd love to hear from Alison, from you on. How do you feel about these newer competitors and sort of global organisations becoming more active in this local space? And what are the concerns that you have around that?
Yes, there are. I mean, you will see startups happening, and that's always been the issue. So we'll have like hyperlocals operating in our areas, and they will cover the street or the area they cover probably in far more detail than we can. So that's a little bit of competition. Yeah. And then you've got, the BBC has got regionals in all our areas, and will cover that patch. And as as people search for new audiences, as you said, the terrain and the habitat that they will move into is obviously going to impinge on us. On local news, it's not so much of an issue because, to be honest, we kind of own the areas, and we will always be like more granular on the reporting that we have. What then happens is amplification, which I don't see as an issue, and actually competition is good, it keeps you sharp. In sport, it's a bit more of a bun fight because there's only so many times you can quote the manager as saying, we must win at the weekend if it's a football match. So where we try and go there is we will, you will always have, the large national competition covering the local football clubs and doing huge amounts of stories on those. Where we try and move in that is to be a fan-first news organisation. So we are listening more and more to what the fans are talking about in terms of football news and what they want to know, and trying to respond to that. So I think there's space for both. It's just a case of looking at the market, seeing what the market wants, and ultimately the market decides, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's it, isn't it, Polly? Like, you've got to slide into those sort of like gaps and open those and broaden them.
It's really interesting hearing Alison saying that, and actually we've got a kind of joint project going on at the moment where our first kind of hiring outside of London is going to be in Birmingham, and one of the first things we did when we were thinking about how we were going to approach Birmingham was get in touch with the Birmingham Mail, and we've got a project we're working on together with them. And it's a very kind of clear understanding that we're there to do national news and they're there to do local news. It's kind of quite clear cut in a way, and I think there's a lot we can help amplify, but also we can make sure we're not kind of turning up on someone else, and also obviously kind of hiring people who are rooted in the area is really important.
Yeah, I mean, Dmitry, is that something in terms of pursuing those local partnerships? What efforts have you made in that respect?
Right? Because we unlike the model that Huffington Post have or CNN have, where they would go into the market and go into partnership with a local player and franchise out the brand, or go into kind of joint venture. We have our own teams. We do partner with local players in terms of syndicating our content on other people's websites, and we track that content that is being consumed off our platform, because they still have the same cookies and the same Comscore code and stuff like that. So that's relatively easy, but. I always use the same example to describe what we actually are and why the strength is there. Is that because unlike a Chibok girl's kidnapping in Nigeria, when it has become front page news for the majority of international broadcasters, and they were scrambling to send the teams out because for majority of them they would not have a team in Nigeria. Not only we have a team in Nigeria, we have a team in northern Nigeria that speak Hausa, whose level of connectedness with an audience there is much higher, right? So by the time then international journalists are only waking up to the story, reading up on Boko Haram and all that kind of stuff. Our guys have been there, and we have a slogan about BBC News calling "Living the Story." So all our journalists are in those places, actually being part of the whole thing. So not in terms of being biased about being a part of the story, but they are there knowing about what it means, and that's why kind of the level of exclusive interviews we are getting via language services is again second to none, because of that relationship via radio in the past, but now increasingly digital and social.
Mm-hmm. And so you're using it, just back to sort of the local, operators that are already there. You're using them more in a sense to syndicate, but would you consider using them to assist and sort of diversify your news gathering in some way?
I would say maybe a completely apocryphal thing, and this is my own point of view here, but I think I'd rather. Lots of international broadcasters are ultimately trying to do very hard journalism in areas where it is hard to be journalists, right? So I would rather actually have a conversation with our counterparts from Euronews, Deutsche Welle, Radio Liberty, actually to run a global Amharic service, or Tigrinya service, or Afan Oromo service, or whatever, another service, pulling resources and actually making I can easily see how we can pull resources and actually be better on joint assignments and stuff like that, because ultimately, especially in the areas where the news are hard to do and hard to reach, because we are serving the same language, and one team is 3 people strong, another team is 3 people strong, so we can do things better together. We haven't done anything yet, but doesn't mean we shouldn't.
Yeah. Okay. Polly, maybe you could talk a little bit about, you know, Huffington Post is moving into different markets, and the relationship you sort of talked about at the top with the different editions is changing in some ways. How are you sort of making those decisions about which markets to, you know, engage more with and to firm up kind of the relationships and, you know, maybe move beyond the, you know, sort of rapport you've had with some of these 17 editions in the past?
So on a global scale, we're actually not expanding any further or going into new markets, because we really want to consolidate what we've got at the moment and make it strengthen the strategy about why we're in different parts of the world. And I think kind of historically editions kind of sprung up in different kinds of joint ventures or kind of O&O, like UK, Brazil and Canada are. There was a lot of autonomy. You basically went with it and you built, and there was a very big emphasis on just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Be that through the blogging network, there was a big global target to get the biggest number of bloggers in the world, and just kind of grow in terms of scale. And I think with the new leadership now, it's very much about kind of strengthening the audiences within the markets we're in. And so we want to kind of exercise all the power we have of being in 17 different countries, but at the same time express it in domestic ways. So one example of that would be some of the kind of joint reporting projects we've done since Louise Rugg started, such as a big project around global air pollution. And we're kind of finding themes that kind of resonate for all our audiences and really pooling our resources, and that feels really impactful. And we've got a big project coming up on pride and gay rights, because that's something that resonates in every country we're working in. And we're doing a big collaboration over the royal wedding, because frankly the Canadians and Americans are more interested in the royal wedding than most of my newsroom is. I
think that's fair to say. You can share that experience.
but it's actually a really fun project to work at, like globally, because you know the level of interest is just wild.
It's through the roof.
You have so much fun with it.
So but with something like the climate project, how have you changed that collaboration to, you know, where was it sort of on everybody to report different components or to syndicate it in some specific way?
So we pulled that together by everyone basically pitching in with their ideas that worked in their markets, you know, the things they wanted to pursue, and then we created a kind of global slate out of that, and a mini site that kind of housed all that journalism on it that was much less domestic facing, and we worked really hard on the PR side of that as well, to kind of like tell the story of what we were doing as well. But it was a really fantastic project to get us collaborating on ideas as well. There were colleagues in other countries who were talking about things that hadn't occurred to us, and vice versa. So it was like a fantastic way to share ideas across countries.
I think it's actually quite an interesting thing of thinking about from the point of view of saving money as well, in terms of cross units and cross editions collaboration, because obviously if you're launching a team which is only able to create 10 pieces of content a day, then and the team belongs to BBC portfolio, then certainly they will need to come up and give the best BBC content on the day to their audience. And then if they belong to Africa team, then they also will be really great content coming from Africa for all of them at the same time. So we have 12 African teams, and they all will be getting best content that all other African teams are doing on a daily basis. So that's already saving them money, right? And then they concentrate to only producing 3 or 4 pieces of content or their original content on the day, and going back to the seasons and some other special projects. I think this is also another thing which you can do on a consecutive basis, because not many organizations can show you a global problem, from the perspective of 40, 17 and many other editions, right? And that's a great thing, because we are all people around the world. Majority of them are young, majority of them are future professionals, and one of their big aspirations and be connected to the world and understanding what's happening in the world. And actually a life of somebody living in Jakarta is not dissimilar to somebody who lives in Caracas, for example. You know, there are lots and lots of common themes there.
I just want to move on to talent for a moment, and the reporters and the editors and the people who, you know, help you kind of to shape these stories and find the topics that are really important within these different regions. I think, Alison, you talked at the start about, you know, taking the approach of just being so embedded and living the lives that, you know, the users and the readers and whatnot are experiencing as well. Can you expand upon that a little bit? And is that an approach across the company, or is there different ways to do it?
Yeah, it is. And actually we're in the middle of a new rollout now to try and connect us more with the communities, because I don't know about your newsrooms, but our newsrooms are pretty much university educated, white, lots of men, and our communities aren't necessarily like that. So what we're doing at the moment is using really deep dives into local data to understand who lives in our communities and how they live in our communities. So, for example, that might mean that, and we have done this, stop thinking that everybody arrives in Birmingham by car or train, and start understanding that people who live in Birmingham actually arrive in their place of work by bus or by foot. But if you're a journalist and you don't do that, that's not your experience, and you don't really think that the bus routes are a story. If you're on the bus and that route's cancelled, that potentially is an extra hour journey for you, or a lot more money. So that sort of thing. Who are we writing for? We constantly have to refine it. The moment that you think you know your audience, you're in trouble, I think. There's always another group or set of people with a need state. And that need state might be temporary. It might be a bunch of parents or expectant mums who come together to try and save a specific neonatal service that's in the area that's closing down. And once that's over, once they've involved us and we've helped them, that group might disperse. So it's understanding that these things are not kind of set in stone. They change all the time, and we need to understand that we need to change all the time. So we use data an awful lot. We constantly are looking inward at how we operate and how we performed on the day. And some of our sites have started inviting people in to be a part of news conference. So there was a week where people were invited to just come in, join the conference for the Liverpool Echo, be a part of it, spend the time in the newsroom, talk about what they thought. They had views on the stories that were being worked on. In other areas like Nottingham and Manchester, we go out into the real world and we hold meetings with people. We just like in the area, so come and talk to us. Or we do regularly big surveys online for people to tell us how we live. But the going out and being in the world is far more important, because not everybody has the data or the time or actually the digital capability to do things like talk to you on Facebook. One of the big learnings that we had from launching a mums group was that a lot of young mums were on Facebook, but they really liked the idea of having like this organisation for them, but they didn't know how to join and be a part of that group. They thought that once they liked it, they didn't think that anything would happen. They didn't realise they were allowed to like tell us what they'd like us to cover or anything. So every time we talk to people, we learn something else, really.
It's interesting. It's just I'm sorry. What you're saying resonates so well, because I always was saying that basically all BBC local teams and all BBC World Service International teams should be the same department, because they have so much in common in terms of how close they are to their audiences. And we have launched, in order to integrate, in order to reach more women in countries where we are overwhelmingly serving male, we opened up several closed groups for women in areas on like WhatsApp, for example, where they feel safe and they're able to talk. Because we know that, for example, in India or in some other Asian countries, women do not tend to engage on social media because they're trolled like hell, frankly. So they are extremely, extremely vulnerable there. So we had to basically reach out to individual people and saying, this is a safe area for you, come over and we'll just talk. So very similar to what you're saying.
What you said though is that you know, taking the bus, you know,
Yeah.
and how is for global players though, like ourselves, how do we take the bus? You know, how do you get your teams to have that closeness to the audience, to be able to understand what those issues are that are really important to be reporting on?
Well, it was so interesting when we met with Alison's team in Birmingham, because so many of the issues were really similar, and I think we're coming out of a period where particularly for legacy organisations or for something like HuffPost, which was kind of very aggregation and scale driven, people were sat at their desks and really kind of churning it out and like just trying to get, you know, hit all the deadlines. And I think that's why we kind of lost that connection, like one of the reasons. So it was really interesting how similar a lot of our experiences were and how important it was to get out. But for HuffPost, it's like we're never going to be able to be in every high street in the country. And what I'm trying to do is shift the centre of the gravity of our thinking outside of London. So we're truly national. And actually my newsroom is really kind of national, like there's not many Londoners in the newsroom, but the minute they've spent a couple of years working within that bubble, it's just that the thinking kind of narrows down. So it's having kind of, trying to get people out there who will just challenge us a bit as well, to kind of shift that thinking, challenge that thinking. And I am North London through and through. I've never left North London, basically. And so I'm like the worst version of that. And I, you know, the team needs to, you know, get out.
To get out more.
Yeah, totally. And day to day, it's like just about sending reporters out of the office, which a year ago was actually quite a radical thought.
Right.
For HuffPost, which like is really kind of quite shocking to me now. And now people are out every single day, and people are out of London every week, and it's really I feel like that's already making a difference. But no, it was quite shocking to me how much agonising there was over a decision to send someone out of the office.
I just want to tell you a story about BBC Pidgin. So some of you might have heard about that. We launched something which is a service of a language which is a spoken language. It's not a language really. It is a language, but it's sort of written or codified language. And we now have 4 teams for Nigeria. Well, English, housed in the fast. We just launched Yoruba and Igbo for South and East. And Pidgin is a language spoken by people in West Africa across several countries at the same time. Ghana, Nigeria, of course, and with a little bit of Cameroon as well. And Pidgin, nobody writes in Pidgin. There are radio stations in Pidgin, and it's a language mixed of Portuguese origin, English words, African words, like all sorts of things. And we thought, well, if it's such a big thing in Nigeria, then why don't we launch a service in Pidgin? So the whole service, like we hired people who would have been Hausa speakers, Yoruba speakers, whatever, but the task was just only to write in Pidgin. And initially we thought, well, why don't we do just a website which is going to be audio-visual, because everybody is just listening or watching Pidgin. And we thought, well, why don't we go further and just codify language ourselves? Like, that would be a public service thing to do, just like, let's create a language properly. And we did. And the most important thing is that you sort of when their eyes light up when they realize that actually the language which they speak with their children, and well, we got a lot of stick for launching Pidgin, because actually lots of people were saying we are spanking our kids for talking a language which is not a language. So we all want them to speak proper English or whatever. But actually, it's we need to realize the realities out there on the street. And if this is what people say, that's what people talk.
Okay. I want to move on to talking about some of kind of the responsibilities of being more local in your coverage, and also, you know, the sort of the thinking about how best really to operate in these markets and to do so without, you know, displacing existing operators. You know, there's what are those responsibilities that global media organizations have in that local context? Especially, you know, if we're commercially driven and you take these routes into different markets, but then perhaps, you know, commercial motivations then force you to reconsider and you begin to pull back from them. Any thoughts on that? Maybe start with
Well, I'll pass on commercials. So
Yeah, I know. Yes, let's start over here with Polly.
Well, I mean, it's a very pertinent question in the UK where we're such a congested media market as well. So you're really trying to kind of carve out a space, and it's like fiercely competitive. And I think kind of I take a really different approach to being competitive with other nationals, which I'm really, you know, that's our job, is to be competitive, get scoops. Oh, sorry, I'm doing it wrong again. To, you know, get scoops and be competitive and, you know, have a business model that works and all of those things. But, you know, when we go into Birmingham, you know, we're really mindful that if you're kind of expanding into a new area, you can't just bowl up and pretend that you know the city, own the city. You know, you've got to hire people who know the city so that there's some authenticity there, and kind of build relationships and be quite humble about that as well. And I think, you know, that's the approach we're really trying to take, and it's really lovely working with the Birmingham Mail. They've been really welcoming, actually.
I mean, Dmitry, it's not probably just a commercial question, though. I think it gets probably to the title of this session. You know, how local should global?
Well, I'll tell you a story. So I was thinking one of the things which we can give back to every market is by educating local journalists, because obviously when BBC comes, like in the last. When the government gave us this money to expand and to build up the existing teams and to launch new teams, we knew that digital would be very important, and then digital investment was and ended up being the second largest part of that huge investment, and we created about, I don't know, 350 roles around the world to beef up our operation everywhere. And we also knew that you know, it's some things you never even appreciate how difficult it is to expand into so many markets in such a short period of time, because actually, you know, we all know what it is like to apply for a job in a Western society. Like, you go to a website, you register, you submit your CV. This is not a reality in East Africa. This is not a reality in Delhi. It's just not the thing. So people just need to be. We did a lot of university outreach meetings where we would come and explain what we are and what we do and what kind of values we bring, and actually guide people through the process of actually applying to the job sometimes. And then I remember when I was the managing editor of BBC Russian team many years ago, I actually toured Russian universities with an outreach program of seminars and lectures, and then in the evening we would do a radio program live from that locality, so actually to show people. This is something which I actually feel very passionate about, because we can get people to learn how we do things early on in their career, so we can again get people who already understand what we are looking for and what kind of things we can get. So all our websites have BBC Academy versions in their own language, i.e. all the training materials, all the best practice, all that kind of stuff, all free of charge, all available to people in their own vernacular language. So this is the way we can contribute to the development of the media in that particular area.
Alison, I'm curious to hear this from your side. How local do you think global publishers should go?
I mean, the commercial model for news is wrecked. There's no point sitting here and saying let's all have a fight over the advertising that goes around a news story. That's programmatic. It will serve up whoever sees it. If it's a big news story, people will go to multiple sites. Where our value is being able to say to probably a global or a national advertiser that we can give them a segmented local audience down to a part of a city or a part of a county. And that's actually what quite often the media buyers are looking for. They want the scale of the Huffington Post. They want to be able to hit a large number of people, and then they also want to be able to get at a very specific postcode level of people. So, for example, a supermarket, a national supermarket chain will come to us and to the HuffPost because they kind of operate on different markets and different audiences. We've got a print audience that is very important to them. They have, a national reach that they can do with you, for example, Polly, and then, the local store will be able to put in its own kind of bargains that happen to be in that specific area. So I know, like, supermarkets they sound like a strange example, but actually they're really big media buyers, as are TV channels. So that sort of thing, I think, is where there is space to the market. It's just understanding that you're not fighting on the same pitch. You're fighting on, like you're playing badminton and I'm playing tennis.
Yeah, I think that's very right. I mean, we've got our audience that we're focusing on and growing. Our biggest audience is women, millennials, university educated, and we're looking to grow that audience. So in our local, our regional expansion, we're very much targeting areas where we're under indexing for that specific person,
right?
Because that ties in with the advertising model.
I'm going to pause there and open up for questions. So just wait until the mic reaches you. I see one over here, up in the third row. If we could get a microphone up here, please.
Hi.
Oh, well, okay. Apparently we're going to the back first.
This one first? I'm sorry. I don't
That's
know.
okay.
So I always want to take the example of Birmingham in the UK. There is a very vibrant hyperlocal scene in Birmingham. And I'm just wondering what the justification is for a national organization to show up in a community and basically take the attention away from people who live there, who are deeply rooted in the place, and basically continue to nationalize and globalize the news ecosystem when we know that it is exactly that is driving a lot of the distrust. I understand that you're sort of, you're coming into the community and trying to be of them, but the fundamental process is not that, right? You are a national organization, you're looking for scale, it's taking money and attention and power from those people and that economy. So I'm just wondering what the sort of moral justification for that might be.
I can't see how it's taking power from people if you're strengthening the local journalistic base. I think it's very much about better reporting. So kind of putting the advertising model to the side, the main motivation is that we're getting the story wrong. If your team is entirely sat in London, experiencing London transport systems and experiencing London hospitals, education, government, you've got a very different experience of the country than the majority of the country. So, I think I'd kind of probably push back against that and say our journalism will be better if we're closer to people and people will relate to it more.
Dmitry, do you want to jump in on that?
Well, I think let's take India as an example, right? It's an extremely competitive media market, like 700 TV channels. If you ever watched any of those TV channels, you probably will see about 6 or 7 things happening on the screen at the same time, like, the market, currency exchange, latest news, all of them at the same time, and there will be 3 people shouting at each other at the same time in the studio, something like that. So, and I'm saying it not to kind of slag them off, this is just a way of having there is no calm way of, I guess, debating Indian politics as a rule, right? So there is a place, we provide a place where we make sense people, we cut through the noise. And there is a place where an intelligent conversation can happen on our social media channels or on our TV programs. We can, I just wanted to share the approach. We treat the news from 6 different angles. We commission news that satisfies 6 different user needs, which are very specific for around the world. There are 6 user needs that people are expecting to be getting from media, and Update Me is only one, and there are 5 others. And we think that actually Give Me Perspective news and Educate Me is what BBC should be there for. So we, like an example, on the day when Macron won elections, probably it's irrelevant news for majority of our markets, frankly. Like nobody cares if you are in, I don't know, if you're in Sao Paulo, do you care about, Macron winning elections? Maybe not, but us as an international organization, what we can do is we can give people perspective on him being the youngest leader of France since Napoleon, and we give them a piece about 5 other youngest leaders around the world. And that basically gives them social currency type of news.
And that's really interesting because, Alison, you mentioned the inform...
Yeah,
what were the 3?
Kind of tell me, help me, entertain me.
Yeah, and then in Mike, sorry, and then in our language, what the ones we focus on as well are inspire and motivate. So it's
So
about
that's,
kind of taking
this is
action.
excellent. So
Yeah.
we also have Inspire, right?
Yeah.
So we've got Update Me is one, Give Me Perspective is another one, Educate Me the third one, and then the other three are Amuse Me, which is actually not Amuse Me. It's not just about kind of laughing cats or something like that. It's mainly something which we also call Divert Me. So you're tired about reading about Syria, so divert me to something else at the same time. And then there is also Keep Me on Trend, like what people are also talking about, and Inspire Me as well.
Yeah,
I mean,
we're all
think-
doing the same thing, basically.
At least our aspirational sort of, yeah, indeed. I mean, the last thing I suppose I'd say on that, just from a CNN perspective, is that, you know, when we thinking about some of the stories, for example, Zimbabwe's story, South Africa's story, recently some of the threads in those, the Qatar blockade and Turkey, when we see some of these stories, I mean, the minute we sort of look at our real-time analytics, we're seeing huge spikes of regional traffic. Quite often the regional audiences are the biggest audiences on those stories. So just, you know, oftentimes the audiences are looking beyond, and I think to Alison's point, when it's a big story, they're going to read multiple sources. They're going to take in possibly different perspectives. So providing those perspectives certainly it's borne out through kind of where we see those audience trends in those moments where there's a search for, you know, lots of different viewpoints on something that's developing. Let's move on to the next question. Ezra.
All right, so Blathnaid, your answer is a really nice segue into my question, which is I'd be really interested to hear more of what CNN International is doing on a local level, besides being kind of this impartial authority on what's happening on the ground in local areas. Okay, multi-part question, kind of interrelated. Next to you, Polly, which is you talked about HuffPo going more for engagement rather than aggregate growth, which I think is the right thing to do. But I'm wondering how you guys came to this decision. I also note, for example, you mentioned about working with local partners, so HuffPo is no longer working, you know, HuffPost Arabi, you've done away with your local partner there. So is it more about focusing on building a relationship with readers, and having this more organic growth within that community? And maybe you could just talk about how you came to that decision. And I'm going to go from there and jump to Dima and say the risk that I kind of see with BBC doing this expansion is all of this international expansion comes the back of limited funding from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and you guys have grown really, really quickly, really soon. But the risk with that, as we've seen with other organizations like CNN, BuzzFeed, and elsewhere, is that cuts will come inevitably. And that's already happening in the BBC, it's already happened elsewhere. And if that should happen, you risk not just losing your audience and your contacts on the ground, but you risk losing your trust in these networks as well. So I'm wondering, like, what's the plan B? Yeah. And Alison, I'm not really asking you anything because I think you guys are doing a great job. So.
Say hi as well.
Okay, I'll kick off really quickly because I'm conscious of time. What are we doing? We're doing a lot of interesting things. We are putting probably a lot of our focus on markets where there are sort of high concentrations of English speakers. We do have the Espanol and Arabic offerings as well. But so, you know, markets like Germany, Singapore, Australia, logical places for us to sort of work to expand our footprint in. And I think that, you know, we do have to be smart about the angles and approaches that we take to stories. I think that there's a risk in getting too local, you know, for an organization like CNN. I think we've got to, you know, for us, when it comes to, for example, Germany and covering something like an election there, you know, it's not going to be sort of looking at the internal kind of politics between the parties, but there are threads within that are incredibly globally relevant. So, you know, looking at the increase in poverty, for example, in Germany, you know, in such a country that probably the world thinks is incredibly wealthy and is, you know, and it had risen from 10% to 17%, you know, that in itself not very interesting, probably to a wider audience, but we looked at it from the perspective of the number of Germans being forced to use food banks, and that was a connection point for kind of a wider audience. Similarly, with our As Equals project, which looks at gender inequality in the world's least developed countries, with that we're specifically targeting 6 countries within that, and the goal and some of the it's a project that is enabling us to do a lot of experimentation, especially trying out different things locally. So, we're hoping to partner, for example, with some local media outlets, and we are also through that we've enhanced kind of the partnership that we have with one of our affiliates in Sweden, Expressen. Both they are syndicating all of the content from it, but it's not a one-way relationship. We're going to be at some point over the course of 12 months using reporting that the Expressen reporters are doing on this and bringing that to a CNN audience. So, these sort of projects like As Equals, they offer us an opportunity to really do a lot of experimentation on that kind of local sphere. We have 5 minutes left, so I think we're going to get through the rest of Ezra's questions here and maybe time for one last one. But Polly, she had something for you as well.
So the move from reach to loyal audiences for HuffPost is about more interesting journalism, and I think this is one of the most interesting times in journalism because we're not just chasing big numbers anymore, which anyone can do and achieve, but we're doing something much more meaningful now about building loyal audiences. So that's really deliberate and exciting. And the Arabic cut, it's kind of it's about consolidating the countries we're in and building the audiences within the countries we're in, and some were not working as well.
Right, okay, so quick answer. So just to put things into perspective, we are 2 years in 4-year investment cycle. So we have launched everything. So the growth hasn't come yet, right? So we just launched them, right? So we made it happen. So now it's the start of the work, right? So all the investment are going to mature within the next 2 years. There are key performance indicators, both internal and external, which they are going to look, and there are targets for each team to be reached. Initially, when we invested in all these 350 roles or whatever, in digital specifically, all of those roles have been made permanent. So there is no difference between a BBC staffer from 10 years ago and a BBC staffer who was just hired. So BBC, if we were not to receive more government funding, and I guess we are now going to start working on the new business case like next month already for after the investment going to end in 2022, or 2020. So we probably will be looking at pitching for exactly the same and more. And if they say suddenly, no, we're not going to give it to you, we are going to look at the whole portfolio as a whole, old and new, and we'll have to reconfigure. And because I remember 2011 when we were funded by the government fully at that time, and they passed on 30% savings to us. And there was a bloodbath, obviously. It was really one of the toughest things which we have closed many languages, many services. So we kind of know how to do it, but at the same time, nobody wants to do it ever. But it will be probably, if it was up to, you don't have budget, you need to prioritize only things that you could do.
I think we have like 2 minutes left, so let's go for one more question. Can we get a mic right up the front? Possibly. Right, man in the front row, thanks.
Hello, I'm coming from Afghanistan. The countries that NATO and all international community were involved there within 17 past years, and most of the big influential media also were there, like BBC with a big office, Al Jazeera and many. Yes, all of these medias had a lot of report from Afghanistan, daily, monthly. Many events are reported. But after 17 years, I feel that most of the big influential media audience don't know about the essence and nature of continuous conflict in Afghanistan. And did massive reporters did not help the audience to know what is exactly going there. And I think this is a big challenge for all the medias and journalists is that our audience all the time asking about the how and when, but they are not asking, or most of them at least, not asking about the why, because all of the medias and journalists are reporting all the time about the smoke and the massive smoking, but none of them are going to why this is smoking and from where it is coming from. And
so I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry to cut across you, but we've just been given that we have to finish because we're absolutely at our time limit. So might I suggest that we take this up with the four of us when we step out.
Just about the last part that you said about responsibility.
Yes.
So I think it is a challenge. If you agree with me.
I don't. I don't. From the point of view of BBC, I think BBC covers Afghanistan in Dari, Uzbek, and Pashto, and we are almost national broadcaster there. So in terms of the impact to the audience, so I'll push back on that a little bit.
And we'll pick this up. We will pick this up when we move off because we are completely out of time. Thank you all so very much. I know there are other questions which we will get to. Thank you so much.